Hi everyone! Today I am going to read a story called Little Miss Tiny. To be tiny is to be minuscule, very, very little. So Little Miss Tiny by Roger Hargreaves. Little Miss Tiny was extremely small, not very tall at all. She was so very tiny that she didn't live in a house. Do you know where she lived? In a mouse hole, in the dining room of Home Farm. She had made the mouse hole quite comfortable, really. And luckily, there weren't any mice because the farm cat has chased them all away. The trouble was, because she was so tiny, nobody knew she lived there. Nobody had noticed her. Not even the farmer and his wife. So there she lived, all alone, with nobody to talk to. She was very lonely and sad. Oh dear. One day, she was feeling so lonely, she decided to be very brave and go for a walk. Out of her mouse hole she came. She crept across the dining room and went through the crack in the door and into the hole. To Little Miss Tiny, the hole looked as big as a field as she scuttled across it to the back door of the farm. Luckily for her, the letterbox was at the bottom of the door and she squeezed herself through it and onto the doorstep. It was all very exciting. There before her was the farmyard. She went exploring. She came to a door with a gap at the bottom and ducked in underneath. There, inside, was a pig, a large pig. And if you are as small as Little Miss Tiny, a large pig looks very large indeed. Miss Tiny looked at the pig. Oink! He grunted and moved closer to inspect this little person who had entered his tie. Oh, my goodness me! Squeaked Little Miss Tiny in alarm and shot out of the pigsty as fast as ever her little legs would carry her, which wasn't very fast because her legs were so very little. She ran right around to the back of the pigsty before she stopped. She leaned against the wall and put her hands over her eyes and tried to get her breath back. Suddenly, she heard a noise. A very close noise. A sort of breathing noise. Very close, indeed. Oh! She hardly dared take her hands away from her eyes, but when she did, she wished she hadn't. What do you think it was there, right in front of her, looking at her with green eyes? Ginger, the farm cat. Poor Little Miss Tiny. Ginger grinned, showing its teeth. Help! Shrieked Miss Tiny at the top of her voice. Oh, somebody! Help! The trouble was, the top of Little Miss Tiny's voice was not a very loud place. Ginger grinned another grin. every day, Mr. Strong went to Home Farm to buy some eggs. He liked eggs. Lots of them. That day, he was walking home across the farmyard when he heard a very tiny squeak. He stopped. There it was again. Oh, round the corner. He looked round the corner and saw Ginger and the poor trapped little Miss Tiny. Shoo! Said Mr. Strong to Ginger and picked up little Miss Tiny very gently. Hello, he said. Who are you? Miss Tiny. Oh, you are, aren't you? Smiled Mr. Strong. Well, if I was as tiny as you, I wouldn't go wandering around large farmyards. But, said Miss Tiny, and told Mr. Strong about how she was so lonely she had to come out to find somebody to talk to. Oh dear, said Mr. Strong. Well, now, let's see if we can't find you some friends to talk to. And now, every week, Mr. Strong collects little Miss Tiny and takes her off to see her friends. 3 weeks ago, he took her to see Mr. Funny, who told her so many jokes she couldn't stop laughing all day. And 2 weeks ago, he took her to see Mr. Greedy. He told her his recipe for his favourite meal. But that's much too much for tiny little me, she laughed. Mr. Greedy grinned. For you, he said, divide by 100. Last week, Mr. Strong took her to see Mr. Silly. And Mr. Silly showed her how to stand on your head. That's very silly, said little Miss Tiny. Oh, thank you, replied Mr. Silly modestly. And guess who she met this week? Somebody who became a special little friend. I never thought I'd ever meet anybody smaller than me, laughed Mr. Small. Little Miss Tiny looked up at him and smiled. Oh, you wait till I grow up, she said. And that's the end of our story, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and there are going to be more to come. So stay tuned. Bye, everybody, and stay safe.